Hi guys, my name's Roanna. I'm a psychologist from Sydney, Australia, and I have... Cool. Hello! Welcome back to my channel. My name is Roanna and I'm a general psychologist and clinical psychology registrar from Sydney, Australia. And today I just wanted to hop right in and talk about the disadvantages and advantages of being a psychologist. So I might just start with my experience so you know where I might be able to talk to these advantages and disadvantages, and then launch right in. We might do one advantage and then one disadvantage. I'm gonna make today's video a bit more of like a chatty, just like if we're sitting down to a coffee and just having a chat, because I don't have that much time to edit, and I know I usually spend so much time cutting out like little seconds between each point, and so today it'll just be a bit more of a loose format and maybe we can get to know each other a little better. I might just jut in here and say that if anyone's not interested in listening to the experience that I've had so far and you want to skip straight on to the advantages and disadvantages, then follow whatever timestamp that I end up posting below, and then once you click it you'll get directed straight there. Okay, bye. So in terms of my experience, I did my Masters of Clinical Psychology at the University of Sydney, and every time you do a Masters program at a university you will always be working in their internal psychology clinic. So I worked at the USyd Psychology Clinic, and that was across all ages. So I had child and family clients. We did have a lot of university students because it was like a satellite clinic. It was just a little bit off campus, so we did have a lot of uni students, but I also had clients all the way up to like I think it was like 60 was my oldest client, and so we did a mixture of psychological therapy but also assessments. So that's at the USyd clinic, and then as part of the master's program you always get sent out on placements, and in our cohort of 20 we all got sent to different centres, and so for the second half of your masters you actually get to go to kind of whatever your interest group is. However, these also come along with interviews, and so the ones that I was really interested in was community mental health, and that's because typically people who are referred to community are a bit less advantaged, and because the treatment is free, we do see people of a lower socioeconomic status, as well as just the type of treatment that we're offering is a bit more supportive in that we don't just have a psychologist, but we have a multidisciplinary team. So we might have a treating psychiatrist, a social worker, a peer worker, and we also have these like larger team meetings together. So in terms of experience, I really wanted to work in community, and I was really lucky to be able to get both an adult community placement and a child one. For my adult placement, I worked at my local community mental health centre, which was directly connected to the hospital, and so we had a mixture of people who were kind of normal clients who presented with mood or anxiety disorders. We also had people who were referred from the intensive care unit, or the psychiatric intensive care unit. I think it's called the PIC, correct me if I'm wrong. And these were people who might have been acutely suicidal, or they might have had a referral from family members who believed they were in danger, and so once they've kind of had a period and they've stabilised and they're ready to go back home, they're referred to community mental health, and we kind of manage that process. And then I also ran a DBT group, which is working with borderline personality disorder, which basically is just people who experience intense emotion dysregulation, and typically it comes with a history of a trauma or emotional invalidation. So that was another thing that I did as part of community mental health. That was mostly adult, so all of my clients were 18 and above, but then I did go up to older, so I was probably seeing someone like 65, but then I also had clients who were like 25, and so that was an adult placement. After that, I did another community mental health centre in the eastern suburbs, kind of near the beach, and that was at a child and family centre. So again, a community health centre, but I was only seeing 0 to 12, and while I was there I just worked in child and family therapy. And I also ran a group, so the Cool Kids group, which you guys probably have seen in my most recent vlogs. I'm also doing again now in private practice. After that, I worked in Headspace for a bit, which is like the Australian funded like young people's mental health centre. I'm currently working in private practice where I work with children and families. I work between 0 to 18. However, even though it's like a child clinic, probably like 70% of my day I work with adults because I'm working with parents of children. So yeah, that's kind of my experience to date. Alrighty, so advantages and disadvantages. I'm gonna try and make this as chatty as possible, so please excuse me if you see my eyes just like dart across because my laptop is here and I've just written some notes down. So probably the first and the one that probably everyone thinks of is the fact that it's a really rewarding career. And so I guess I get up in the morning and my goal, or what I'm kind of aiming for, is to help support people who are going through a tough time, whether it be in child work, adult work, whether it be conducting assessments, doing group therapy. I kind of feel like I'm doing something that's good and I'm making the world a better place in some way. And I think that's a lot of why people want to do psychology in the first place. They're just drawn to this idea of having a career that really like attunes to their values, if they have values of helping other people. And so I always really feel like my work is meaningful, and even when I feel tired or unmotivated, I'm still kind of like, you know what, like this feels good. Like I feel like I'm doing something useful for the world. And I think another kind of like sub point for that is that because the work is working on helping support people, you have these really positive, uplifting moments where you might see someone come in at their lowest point. They've contacted the psychology clinic. They say like, I'm just hopeless. I don't know what to do. This is my last chance. And then you're kind of with them along the way on their journey of really working hard on themselves and giving themselves time to reflect and change their patterns, and you get to be a little part of that. And so it's so rewarding to be able to see that and to walk alongside people on their journey as well. So that's a massive advantage and something that I feel like makes the job something which is a career, and that I feel like I would want to do for the rest of my life. And I guess the flip side of feeling like the job is really meaningful and rewarding is that, I mean, a less altruistic version of that is that it's really nice. It feels really good. When I see a client and they say there's been a lot of movement and, you know, I couldn't have done it without what we discussed and the change in thinking or the strategies that you provided, it gives me like a huge buzz. I'm like, I'm so glad that I was able to do something, and that's really rewarding for me as well. And first disadvantage is that it can be very draining, and I guess coming along with the fact that people usually refer to a psychologist when they're struggling with something in their lives, typically they refer the moment when it's worse. That's the unfortunate way that I guess there's still a lot of stigma around psychology, and so people don't go to a psychologist for support when they're first experiencing the difficulty. Often it's like when they have no other choice and they feel like they can't go on, or they feel like they have no other options left, then they go refer to a psychologist. And so you're seeing people every day who might be going through some really tough things, like they might be really depressed, or, you know, feeling suicidal, or they might be experiencing a lot of stress in child and family work where the parents are just overwhelmed and they feel really guilty because they feel like they're not supporting their children enough. And it's very, very common to have lots of people cry in front of you, lots of people just tell you heartbreaking stuff of things that they've had to go through or things that they're currently thinking, and it's not easy stuff to listen to as well. And I guess that's also the first disadvantage that most people think about when they study psychology, because they worry like, will I be strong enough to be able to listen to those things and, you know, be strong enough to actually help support the other person as well. And for me, I guess I've drifted a little bit more towards child and family work because first of all, it's something I'm passionate in, and I have always loved working with young people. But the other thing is the work tends to be a bit more in the mild to moderate range when you're working in private practice. Whereas when I was working at the Adult Community Health Centre, I was supporting a lot of suicidality, and even when I went home, I'd kind of wonder like, oh, I wonder if this person is going to be okay tonight, and there was a lot more risk involved. So the thing is, fortunately, I guess this is back to an advantage, fortunately you can choose which area you want to specialise in, and I'll get into that a bit later. I guess it's really rewarding that people are able to share their troubles with you, and they're able to let you into a really private part of their life, but then it is a little bit of an exchange where it's like when they talk to you, you feel like you take some of that weight off, and then you're kind of carrying the weight, and you kind of have to learn how to set the weight aside and put it down, and to be able to move on from that. So that's why psychologists talk a lot about self-care. It's a big part of our training. However, even despite that, I've gone through like mini periods of burnout probably twice now, and I've only been practicing for 4 years or so. So it's a really central part of learning how to be a good psychologist is learning how to take care of yourself when things get really draining. Okay, back to an advantage. So second advantage is you learn a lot about yourself as well, because while you're doing therapy, you have to go through a process of a lot of supervision where you kind of talk through your reaction to your clients and what might have influenced that from your own history, and you learn so much about the human mind and thinking and behavior that it's kind of impossible to not kind of flip the switch and think about it and use those skills and think about your own life. And so personally, I've also started seeing my own psychologist when I went through my first period of burnout, and that has been hands down one of the best investments, one of the best things that I've ever done, and I cannot recommend enough seeing a therapist. Even if you don't have like a massive issue, or you're not going through a really tough time, even now I still link in with her every month or so, or 2 months even, just to touch base, because there's always something that I'm working on, and there's always things that might be weighing on my mind, and it's just a great way to kind of release that. So you learn a lot about yourself, you think a lot more about your history and your upbringing and why you've become the person that you are. Fortunately, a lot of the advice that I give to clients, I'm also trying to like work on with myself, and so there's a continual process of self-improvement as well. So second disadvantage is there's a lot of work outside of your clinic hours, and that's one of the reasons why it's been like 2.5 weeks since I've uploaded a video. I'm so sorry guys. I had just finished 2 assessments, and so I was writing 2 reports for those, just to hand back to the parents for feedback. So in a typical day, you might see, it really ranges, but maybe between 5 to maybe 9 clients a day. 9 is really too much. But those hours you are just talking to the client. You're not like writing your notes down, you're not writing reports during those hours. And so once you've seen those clients, you then need time to be able to put all your notes in order, because you need to have good notes. It's like a legal requirement of being a psychologist. Alongside that, you have to write GP letters so that you can talk about these sections of the healthcare plan. You write a lot of reports for schools or people you're working on. You do meetings with the school or you do learning plans for kids who might be veteran or anxious or ADHD. You write a lot of reports. You write assessments or psychometric reports. You do things like IQ tests. And so there's so much admin that usually right now at this stage of training, which is early career, I'm working 3 days of clinic, and I'm actually taking about a day and a half off just to do the admin follow-up work. And that's where I'm kind of fitting in my YouTube as well. So for those who are looking for a strict 9 to 5 job, it is something that you can achieve if you schedule yourself like that, but most people that I see right now, like, the work can really expand, and you have to be the one to really actively take boundaries and make sure that you keep your work within certain hours and not let it just kind of spread out, because there is always more work to do. And since I've started working as a psychologist, I've never had a time where I'm like, oh, there's nothing I can do, because you can always plan for a session, you can always write GP letters, and so there's a lot of work outside of just doing your 1 hour of face-to-face. But yes, on the flip side of that, the advantage is that it's very flexible if you work in private practice. So just from what I'm aware of, there's a lot of there's kind of two main streams, which is either working in private practice or working in community health, which is part of the government. Some roles are a bit more salary based, which is more government roles where you go in and your hours are a bit more 9 to 5. So for those who are not good at setting boundaries, that's a good role. But the other one is working in private practice, where you can actually put your start time, you can put your end time, you can put what days you want to work. And so our clinic director actually is about to have a baby, and certain days she will work like 2 to 5 p.m. because she'll spend the morning with her family, or you might suddenly rock up and say like, in 2 weeks time I'm going to work a Sunday, and clients who would like to come in on a Sunday you might call them and they might book you in then. So it's very, very flexible if you like the type of schedule that can work around other commitments. And so I think that's one of the reasons why this year of all times I've been able to start a YouTube channel, because I can actually set half a day aside to do YouTube stuff, and that is completely okay. Another major disadvantage is the fact that most people don't tell you how difficult it is to become a psychologist, and especially a clinical psychologist. So I've done 6 years of study since graduating high school, and I still have not become a clinical psychologist. So after you've done your 6 years, you still need another 2 years of clinical practice where you just work, but you have pretty intense supervision, plus you do a lot of training as well. And so it is an 8-year journey to become a clinical psychologist. For those who want to become a general psychologist, say if you're doing the 4+2 path, by the way, if you're really confused by all these pathways, I have a video about pathways in psychology, so feel free to check that out. Maybe I'll chuck it here. For those doing a 4+2, there is a lot of effort involved in trying to find a good supervisor, a good clinic, and so it's a lot tougher than people think. It's not just you graduate with a degree and then you can go out and work at a clinic. And what is unfortunate is that even in undergrad psychology, you don't know your pathways and they don't really talk about it, because not everyone doing psychology will become a psychologist. However, I don't think I knew until like 3rd or 4th year that there are about 20 spots per uni in a clinical master's program, and that you need to pay like 20k a year to be able to do a 4+2 program. And that is a really big upfront investment for people who kind of just want to get into the workforce. Their goal is just to, get a job, and they just want to start working already. Because in terms of making money as a psychologist, I had to wait 6 years, about 6.5 years before I could start working. So it's a really competitive process, it's a really grueling process, and you have to jump through a lot of hoops in order to finally become a psychologist. Now that I'm here, I do think it's worth it, and I wouldn't say like for that to be the main thing holding you back, because in the grand scheme of life, I guess 6 or 8 years is not massive, and the training really is necessary to become a psychologist, but that doesn't mean it ain't tiring. So another advantage is that the mental health, sector or industry is one that is growing. And I've been reading a lot of news articles lately on how mental health issues have been compounded by COVID, which obviously is not a good thing, but in terms of like an industry perspective, it does mean that there's a growing need for psychologists and people working in mental health. And especially with, the ability to do telehealth, it means that you can see someone who previously would not have been able to access a psychologist. Maybe they're from a rural area, and so the wait list just keeps growing and growing. And when I've been talking to colleagues, everyone has said they're booked out for at least months in advance. And so you can really see how much of a need there is for psychologists. And I don't think that's going to reduce massively, because the stigma is going to keep on getting broken down over time, and people are going to be more and more willing to see a psychologist and more open to it. And so if you're looking for an industry that has potential, I really do think psychology does have that. Though in saying that, I have also read alternate reports and also read some research on AI and how people are doing mental health treatment online. However, most of the treatment has still said that you might do a basic 12 sessions of CBT and psychoeducation online, but sorry, it's really still quite hard to replicate the treatment for people who are on the very severe end of the spectrum. And so I think there is always still scope for work. Hopefully this advice doesn't become completely outdated in like 10-15 years where we're all replaced by psychologist robots. Okay, disadvantage. It is quite a solitary type of work. Apologies. I'm not fully recovered yet. It is quite a solitary type of work because in my, 6-7 hour day, I spend most of that with clients, and so I guess you're never solitary in that you're always talking to people, but in terms of colleagues and having like a team environment, I only get to see my fellow psychologists for lunch break, and sometimes based on our schedules we might not even match up. And so you might go to work and you might talk to like your office mates for like 10 minutes, whereas say if you had an office role, then you'd always be surrounded by colleagues and you might go do lunch together, or you might go do after work drinks, whereas I feel like psychologists are always just too drained to do anything after work, or at least for me. And so it's a role where unless you are very specifically looking for a team environment, and so you might look for the small sector of multidisciplinary teamwork, where you have a lot of team meetings and stuff, I would say that the majority of private practice psychologists who are working just in your local psychology clinics have pretty solitary kind of lifestyles. In saying that though, I guess the flip side of that is, yes, you are seeing clients all the time, and so for people who quite like getting to know people and chatting to people and I guess interacting with the human race, you get a lot of human interaction, you get a lot of socialization, and in fact usually when I get home it's the time where I'm like, no one talk to me, go away partner, I just want to not talk to anyone. And so if you are quite a social person, or if you're just someone who enjoys chatting to other humans, then I think it's a great role. In saying that though, if you're an introvert, which I am as well, it's not to say that you need to be like a social butterfly to be a psychologist. I just really enjoy kind of like learning about people, and you definitely get a lot of that. Yes, another disadvantage is most of the psychologists in my cohort and most that I've spoken to suffer from quite a lot of self-doubt. There's a strong sense of imposter syndrome, like I'm not doing this right, I'm not helping this person, and from people even later in their career that I've talked to, it's something that, can get better, but it never really goes away. And in some ways, I think it just means that we care a lot, that we want to be able to help people, and that we've been given something that is really precious, like someone's mental health or their psychological well-being. For a little period of time, it's kind of in your hands, or you have to help support them in some way. So it's kind of a big responsibility, and it never becomes kind of like, oh, whatever, we'll just leave them be and I don't really care. And so there's a lot of probing, like, am I good enough, and a lot of self-doubt. For that, I do think part of it is just being able to do more work and just gaining more experience to develop your confidence. I'm definitely way more confident now than I was like a year ago, and partly it's because you start to see change and you start to see people implement strategies and come back and say, well, it worked, and you go, yes, thank goodness. I have just noticed the timestamp on my camera, and I've just realised how long this video has become, so I might just like pretty quickly breeze through the rest of my list. And to be honest, I could go probably for triple or quadruple of this time because there are so many little intricacies with the role, but let me just breeze through some of them. Another disadvantage is that we are mandatory reporters, and so sometimes you have to make really hard decisions on, for instance, if you see a family and the child has mentioned that mum and dad, drink a lot, or that they're, not being able to, they're not always present with their children, then maybe that'll have to result in a report to Child and Family Services about drug and alcohol use. And your report could be the thing that starts to trigger, the children getting removed from the family. And so there are these big kind of weigh-ins of like, is this the right choice, is this not the right choice? And a lot of psychologists have to consult with their supervisors or with peers in order to make those group decisions. However, if you ever sense that a child or a family is in danger to themselves or others, we are mandatorily made to report that to the authorities. And so I've had to make a couple of mandatory reports during my time already, and they're never pleasant, and pretty much every time I've had someone else sitting next to me kind of like walking through it together, because it is a tough thing to have to do. Another advantage is that it's a pretty well respected, and in terms of the money for the career, I'd say it's pretty good as well. So it's a pretty stable position where once you become a psychologist, you're pretty much always going to find work. And so in terms of a job security and job prospects, I would say it's pretty good once you become a psychologist. Big caveat, because it takes so long to get to there. Speeding along, another disadvantage is that sometimes clients can be tricky. Sometimes you really connect with a client, you're just like, you're my person, like, I'm so glad we're working together. But occasionally, and thankfully rarely, you do get people who you're like, if I met you on the streets, I probably wouldn't love working with you, or I wouldn't really want to talk to you. And oftentimes that's because they're going through a really tough time in their lives, and maybe they don't want to be there. Maybe someone forced them to have to talk to you, and so you are basically a hurdle in their life from them, doing what they want to do. And so it makes a lot of sense. However, that is something that if you get a client like that, you either have to work through it and do a lot of work on chatting to a supervisor, figuring out why there's that tension between you two, and figuring it out, because you can't support someone if you are hating their guts the whole time, or if you have to make the tough decision to refer them on to someone else because you feel like you can't do proper therapy with them. So yeah, sometimes I guess like any other job, you're met with people who are tough to work with. Back to the advantages. Oh yes, kind of dating a bit back to when I was talking about flexibility, there is also the growing trend of being able to do telehealth. And so it's the kind of role where I'm not sure about the future, but I can kind of see that theoretically you can be anywhere in the world, and if you can do telehealth, you can still help other people. And so this is something that is not currently available, where you can see a psychologist from like Spain or America or something, because we have different regulations. But it's the type of role where you don't really need to do anything physically, and so theoretically you can kind of be anywhere and work with anyone. And so that's more of a future-based thing. Okay, I think this video has gone on long enough, so I'm going to cut it here. Feel free to let me know if you are a psychologist or you work in mental health and you know about any advantages or disadvantages. And if you enjoyed today's video, please do give me a big like and subscribe to join me on the journey for more psychology-based things. My aim really is just to break down the stigma around psychology, and I guess the first step to that is just showing people what it's like to be a psychologist, and to encourage people to pursue it as well. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoy just like sitting down and having a chat, and I hope you guys all have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye.